Morning. From the personal to the policy and the politics. I want to ask you about a bunch of stuff going on in California, but let me start by talking about and getting your view on the kind of underlying philosophy that we're seeing at the federal level with Attorney General Sessions, essentially creating a construct in which more criminal justice reform means less public safety, right? Kind of pulling back from the idea of the Justice Department policing, monitoring the practices of police departments, urging the prosecutors, requiring prosecutors to demand the maximum possible sentence. And he seems to, and underpinning all of that is his argument that these approaches are necessary because the alternative means more crime. Is he right?
Well, he's absolutely wrong, but first I wanted to say hi, Ron, and thank you for letting me be part of this program on defining justice. What I believe he's doing is he's taking us back to those days where we let the boogeyman drive our policy, and it's one of those situations where we seem to want to lock up everything, our fears, our insecurities, our fear of the unknown, the foreign, and we want to look up those prejudices that we see in others, and the easiest way to do that is to keep them out, keep them away. And it seems like the more sheltered you've been in your life throughout your years, the more you want to lock up those things that you don't understand and that seem unknown to you. And it's a policy that simply drives us into poverty, because what we do is we spend so much money keeping folks locked up in jail. 95% of these folks are going to come out of jail. They don't stay locked up forever. And what we've done is we've institutionalized this revolving door that sends them right back where they came out of. And it's that pipeline that we're trying to break today of sending young kids, mostly young men of color, from school straight into the prisons.
This is the biggest, bluest state in the country, as emphatically Democrat as any large state. And yet there are still, as you say, lots of questions about how it deals with all of these interrelated issues around that pipeline. We've done Atlantic events in a lot of different communities around the country that are trying to shift their bail system from financial capacity to risk. How do you rate California on that front?
We're going to get there. We're going to stop. We will stop placing people in detention pre-trial based solely on their ability to pay. And we'll get to the point where we're trying to determine whether you're rich or poor, if you should stay locked up before your trial based on your potential to harm society if you were to be allowed to be out on the street. And so whether you are white or black, brown, whatever your color, whatever your income, it should be the decision on whether you should stay in detention during the phase before your trial should be based on what kind of harm you might cause to society, not on how much money you have.
How do you get from here to there? I mean, what is the mechanism by which we get from where we are to that? These are decisions made mostly now, these are made at the county level, correct?
Yeah, we need to make sure we put the resources into place to provide the alternatives. So house detention, sort of like this guy Manafort is getting, he gets to go out, get out of jail, and he doesn't have to worry about spending his time waiting for trial in jail because he's got enough money that he can bail himself out. And so he's under house arrest. There are ways to try to make sure you provide alternatives to just keeping people in a jail. And we have to make sure that the counties have the resources to make that possible. We have to make sure judges are going through a thorough evaluation of that individual and his or her abilities to be allowed to go back. Principally, what you're doing is you're trying to look at, are there ties to the community? Does a person have a job? Is a person going to school? What are the things that give you some sense of security that the person will show up for trial?
One thing I didn't know before I started preparing for this was that your office has the authority, when requested by a judge, to intervene in a case-by-case basis on bail determinations. And you have, in fact, been intervening in some of those cases. Talk a little bit about what you're doing and why.
We've essentially returned cases to the trial courts and said that we would not agree with the bail setting because there wasn't a thorough evaluation of the individual defendant's ability to meet the bail standard and to be allowed to be released pre-trial. And so that within the confines of the laws that exist right now, we're trying to make clear that at least the Department of Justice will not sign off on any bail that is based solely on income and not on the person's ability to return for court when required based on the person's characteristics.
And it's obviously a limit to how many of those cases you can do. Is the hope to basically send a signal to kind of change the way judges are dealing with this without you having to intervene?
Yeah, it's just repeating what our Supreme Court Justice in California, our Chief Justice, just said, that the current bail system is unsafe and unfair because it's based on income. And we're essentially reflecting what the Chief Justice just said, and that is that just because you require someone to pay a $300,000 bail in order to be released before trial doesn't guarantee that that person who bails out is going to not commit a crime. And so it should be based on the ability to ensure that the public safety will be secured by allowing an individual to go back into the streets awaiting trial. Remember, you're not convicted. You're not guilty of anything until you've been tried, yet so many people are actually being incarcerated before they ever had a trial, simply because they don't have the income to bail themselves out.
Let me ask you about another area. You sponsored legislation, AB 284, which will require the DOJ to do a comprehensive statewide assessment of all officer-involved shootings in 2015 and 2016. That did not pass the legislature. What happens next? Can you advance this idea on your own in any way, or do you simply have to wait and reintroduce the bill again?
We're going to go at it again. We had support in the State Assembly, and we're hoping we can get it passed as well in the State Senate, where what we hope we'll do is we'll, for the first time on a actually first-in-the-nation basis, provide a statewide template to show what's going on with these officer-involved shootings. So rather than act based on anecdotal evidence or based on just one snippet of a video, we're actually trying to determine what's causing these officer-involved shootings and base our actions on the data that we collect from previous years of these incidents that have occurred. And so we're hoping that we can find that there are some best practices where some agencies are doing far better than others, and we can tackle this issue without trying to let the emotions on all sides sort of drive what we try to do.
So is your next step to reintroduce the legislation, or do you have administrative mechanisms you can pursue?
I have administrative mechanisms, but they're not complete. They don't let me do that wholesale evaluation, and so we need the legislation to give us the authority and the resources to go ahead and do that evaluation, to really look closely at a macro level of all these incidents so we can try to give people the best assessment of what's going on.
Because like the federal Justice Department, you do have pattern and practices authority, right, to investigate police departments. What is your kind of guidelines on how you intend to use that authority?
Well, we're right now, at least publicly known, are 3 investigations, pattern and practice investigations that we're doing. One is relates to the Kern County Sheriff's Department. Another relates to the Bakersfield Police Department, and another, which I think is very important, relates to the Stockton Unified School District Police Department. And we're trying to work something out with the agencies rather than simply sue, so we can try to change what we consider a pattern and practice of going after young folks, not based on just objective characteristics, but on who these kids are.
So you had another initiative that did pass, right? AB was a 953, which requires the local law enforcement officials and certain state to specify, to provide data on all law enforcement stops. You are now writing regulations to implement that. What and when can people expect to see?
So California, once again, leading the way, is going to be the first state that does at this level with so many people, 40 million people. We will now require our law enforcement officers to record every stop that they make and indicate whom they're stopping and why. And so we will now have the evidence, the data that will help us, again, try to figure out trends, find out what's going on because of the concern that there is racial and identity profiling that's occurring. And hopefully now we'll have some hard data to help us actually deal with this the right way.
And will the public have access to that data at a county level? They will.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask you about another data point. Prison population in California, it peaked at 163,000 in 2006. The latest figures I saw was 112,300, which was just under 136% of capacity. That's important because the Supreme Court mandated that you get down to about 137.5% of capacity. What's allowed you to bring it down to this point? And is the state on trajectory for further reductions, or will that require new policies?
So I think the state's leaders finally decided that creating the largest prison population in the nation and having a country that has the largest prison population in the world isn't making us safer. And so at least in California, there are efforts now to try to no longer just institutionalize folks. As I said, I think sometimes what we're doing is we're just locking up our prejudices and our insecurities more than we're doing anything good about trying to protect ourselves. And I think what we're doing now is trying to give alternatives to folks who've committed a crime, but in this case, a lower level of crime, and so that we will no longer house them in state penitentiaries. Here's the rub, though. I remember when I first got out of law school, my first job was representing young people who were mentally ill, who were being locked up in adult mental facilities, and that's against the law. And because they didn't have income, they didn't have the capacity to fight for themselves to get out of these institutions. So as a legal services attorney, I would go in. That was during the age of what we call deinstitutionalization of folks who had mental health illness. We deinstitutionalized a whole lot of folks. And we said, let's let them exist in a community setting. What we did, unfortunately, was forgot to provide the resources in the communities to help these folks who were leaving the institutions. And we will rue the day that we try to deinstitutionalize our prisons with with the low-level offenders if we don't provide the resources to reintegrate, to rehabilitate, to offer them alternatives, because then there will be that vicious circle that we constantly see. We could, what's really scary, a young man who is about to be incarcerated in our juvenile facility, and for 1 year, we could let that young man go just not far from here to UCLA 8 times over 8 years, and it would cost less than locking that young man up for 1 year in juvenile prison. And so we should recognize that we're going to save the taxpayers in California a ton of money by no longer incarcerating low-level offenders. But if we forget the second part, which is the follow-through to provide the resources in the community, then we're setting ourselves up for failure.
I thought your first job was professional poker player. Was that undergraduate?
That continues. That just
no, but was that undergraduate? When was no? There's actually a serious question in there, which is, and maybe you answered it a little bit in the previous answer. When you approach these issues, these criminal justice issues, what shapes your experience? Is it kind of your experience as a policymaker, or are there personal experiences further back that inform the way you approach these questions?
I think at the end of the day, if you want to take a look at anyone who's in a position of leadership, politics or otherwise, if you want to know where they're going to take you, just take a look at where they've come from. My parents were immigrants. My father got to about the 6th grade. I'm the first in my family to get to go to a university and get a 4-year college degree. I remember being pulled over once by police when I was growing up with my friends. Didn't ticket us or anything, but just pulled us over. And it was clear that he was just checking to find out if we might be menaces to society. He let me go. The officer was not uncordial or anything, but he had no basis to stop me. And so much of what I do, I think, is shaped by my experiences growing up and knowing that there are a whole bunch of folks like me, like my parents. My father's a retired construction worker. My mother's a retired clerical worker. And for me, if I'm doing a good job as Attorney General or as a leader, it's because I'm helping people who are today's construction worker and clerical worker who, in my parents' days, could buy a house, send their kids to college, and retire in dignity. And I think today it's a lot harder to make a construction worker and a clerical worker believe that could be available to them. And so we need to fight for that so they can feel like their kids will get to do what they never got to do.
So in addition to all the state issues we've been talking about, a big part of your life now is spent fighting the Trump administration in court on a whole series. Roughly how many different lawsuits do you have underway now? Let's see.
We sort of lost track.
You've lost track.
It's, we've got about It's more than a dozen.
More than a dozen. Go back to the 1990s. You did not have Republican attorneys general suing Bill Clinton, not many Democrats against George W. Bush, but it really started in large scale under President Obama, when you saw the coalitions led by Texas suing on DACA, suing on the climate plan, suing on the ACA. Is this now, and now we're seeing it in reverse with Democrats, and for that matter, the Republicans weighing in often as well. For example, on the effort to force him to rescind or pressure him to rescind DACA by going to court. Is this now a permanent feature of the system where there's, in addition to the political conflict at the federal level, we're going to see states routinely now in court fighting an administration of the other party?
First, I see it differently from what I think Republican state attorneys general were doing under the Obama term of presidency. California has gone farther than any state when it comes to whether it's criminal justice reform, environmental protection, clean energy, treatment of immigrants, and it's worked. We've done enough to become not just the economic engine of the country, but we're now the 6th largest economy in the world, and if currency rates fluctuate a bit today, we'll surpass Great Britain and become number 5. And so why should we stop doing what's made us so successful? And so we're going to move forward, we're going to lean forward, and I essentially told the governor, if he did give me this chance to be AG, that I'd have his back in moving forward. So I'm not out looking to pick a fight with anyone, whether in DC or anywhere else, but we're ready for one because we're going to protect the things that we've done that have moved us ahead. And so when I sue the Trump administration for trying to eliminate in ways that are unlawful the DACA program for Dreamers, it's because we're protecting things that have made us very successful. When I sue the Trump administration because they don't want to do something as simple as move forward with energy efficient light bulbs, it's because we've gone through that and we're not interested in going backwards. So it's not that I'm looking for fights to pick, it's that I'm trying to protect the things that have made California the 6th largest economy in the world.
You and other states have had some victories, but at the end of the line on every one of these cases, they all end in the same place, with the Supreme Court with 5 Republican-appointed nominees. Justices, how concerned are you that ultimately a Republican-controlled Supreme Court means that you could be facing, all of the states resisting many of the things the Trump administration is doing, could be facing a dead end at the end?
I mean, you're talking to the son of immigrants. Optimism runs in my veins, and so we're going to win. It's just, it's going to happen. It doesn't come easy, but for
Anthony Kennedy is a Californian, right?
And he graduated from McClatchy High School in Sacramento the way I did, so maybe we can have a conversation. No, at the end of the day, it's not going to be because of one person or one Supreme Court. This is where we're heading. What California is doing, the rest of the nation will do. They're just a little bit behind. Right now there's an election in Virginia going on right now that's being driven by that, lock them up, lock up my prejudices. So the Republicans are attacking the Democratic gubernatorial candidate because Democrats have said that if you served your time in prison, you should be able to vote. And now they're turning that into some boogeyman. Republicans are attacking Democrats because we're trying to protect immigrant families from being separated. And they're saying that that's bad because we're now letting, murderers and rapists roam our streets. It's that boogeyman, and unfortunately, it often works, as we saw in California a generation ago with Prop 187, which was as anti-immigrant a measure as you could have. And as we saw with Michael Dukakis in the 1988 presidential elections with the Willie Horton ad. So
let's talk about Virginia for 1 minute and then turn it back to California, because the other, and probably the one that they put the most money on, has been attacking the Republican nominee, Ed Gillespie, who worked in the Bush White House, worked on comprehensive immigration reform, has moved in a very Trump-like direction, and he's focused a lot of money attacking the Democrats for supposedly supporting sanctuary cities. There are no sanctuary cities in Virginia. The governor vetoed a bill that would have banned them kind of preemptively. The Democrat has really been kind of on his back heels over this, and last week said he would sign a bill to ban sanctuary cities, unlike the current governor. They clearly have had trouble dealing with this issue. This is a state where obviously the policy has gone very far in the other direction, a sanctuary state, quote unquote. What would be your message to Democrats in other states who may be looking at a reprise of the Gillespie tactics in 2018? What is the case that can be made for these kinds of policies?
I mean, don't be afraid. I mean, you just gotta be who you are. As I said,
what's the case for why you are safer if a community limits its cooperation with federal immigration enforcement? Is there a case that can be made?
Cities that are moving to protect their populations and their law enforcement authorities or police forces from intrusion by the federal government telling them how to do their job, are protecting the ability of public safety to move forward. Because what we're saying is we want to keep, it's not a matter of sanctuary cities, it's a matter of safe cities. And you can't have safe cities if there's a segment of the population that won't report crime if they're victims, won't report crime if they're witnesses, because they're too afraid to encounter anyone in law enforcement because they fear that they'll be deported in the process of trying to be a good Samaritan. And so we have in California said we want to have safe cities. And in order to do that, we can't have the federal government trying to commandeer our state and its local law enforcement authorities and telling them, you must do immigration enforcement, a federal activity for us. And we're going to go out there and fight against that. That's why I sued the Trump administration on that, because they don't have the right to tell us under the 10th Amendment how to do our business. And so we'll do public safety our way. We'll let them be in charge of their deportation force.
We'll bring in the audience real quick, but real quick, you have to write guidelines on the, you not only have to deal above on the sanctuary state legislation, you also deal with the counties and with local law enforcement, some of which, especially in agricultural areas, have been less than enthusiastic about the bill. How concerned are you, your office is the one that monitors compliance, how concerned are you about ensuring compliance?
I think most of the sheriffs and police chiefs understand that they want to have safety. And to have safety, their officers, their deputies have to be able to interact with all the community. And we've gone through this experience, as I said before, with Prop 187. We're way beyond that. And be unafraid. As the undocumented dreamers always say, undocumented and unafraid, I think that's exactly what the way Americans should be, unafraid to just tackle this straight on.
Let's bring in the audience real quick. If we have a question somewhere, and then we have a question right there. Oop. There it was, yeah. Second row.
Good morning, and thank you. We talked a little about, since this is a little about women and girls, what reforms do you think we should probably be thinking about putting in place as it relates to sexual harassment? There's been a lot of articles recently about what's going on in the Capitol and so forth, so I'd just like to hear your point of view. Thank you.
Yeah, probably the most important thing is to make a young woman believe that if she reports, action will be taken, because if none is taken, then all it is you become the victim twice. You're attacked by some predator, and then you're attacked by others for having claimed something when nothing is proved up. And so I think the most important thing we can do is really go out there and be aggressive in trying to make sure that if you report, we'll take aggressive action to make sure there's follow through.
Let's do one more question.
Hi, Attorney General Becerra. My name is Jyoti Nanda. I run a youth and justice clinic at UCLA School of Law. I appreciate you're researching the Stockton Unified School Police Department investigation, and wondered, since we were talking this morning about young girls and the impact of school police on their performance in school and their safety and their trauma, if the AG's office would be a leader again in taking a strong stance against perhaps removing school police officers from the school setting.
Yeah. I have lots of jurisdiction, but I don't have jurisdiction to decide how a school district conducts its business. I do have jurisdiction to go in and make sure that they're following the law. And so in the case of Stockton, where we think they may be violating the law in the process of trying to keep the peace, we have the right to go in and do the pattern and practice investigation. What I can tell you is this: I think it is important to make sure that you don't resort to the criminal justice system to deal with issues in a classroom that should be resolved in other ways, because there's something driving that young person to act in a certain way. And it's unfortunate. As I said, we're so We're so afraid to invest the money it takes because we think we're going to fail with this young person. We don't realize how much we would save by trying and trying and trying. Because as I just said to you, and you would know this because you're at UCLA Law School, we could pay for that young man or young woman to go to UCLA undergrad, graduate, then go to UCLA Law School, and still save money than if we just allowed them to be in that youth prison for 1 year. Just crazy.
We have to surrender the stage, but let me ask, I think a lot of people here are wondering, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, do you believe that Congress, in the end, will be able to find a solution for the DACA kids? And if not, what happens? Will the administration begin large-scale deportation?
I think that the DACA dreamers are here to stay. One way or the other, as they said, they're unafraid. I don't believe this country will kick them out. I have less faith in Congress, even though I served there for 24 years. But I do believe that we're going to find a solution for that, whether it's through the litigation that we're engaged in to protect them, or it's through Congress. One way or the other, I think a lot of us are going to stand with the dreamers to say they're here to stay. This is their home.
Join me in thanking Attorney General Xavier Becerra. Thank you.